Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Today is Monday, January 29th, 2024. This is our afternoon Community Planning Infrastructure and Resources work session. We have a number of important topics, discussion of the 2024 Community Development Work Plan, update on the Ranch Master Plan, and other items, I'm sure. My name is John Kafalis, Commissioner from District 1, joined by my fellow commissioners, Jody Shattuck McNally from District 3. Did I get that right? Right. And Kristen Stevens, the other District 2. And of course, we are joined by our County Manager, Lorenda Volker. At this time, I will turn it over to Leslie.
Yes. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Leslie Ellis, Community Planning, Infrastructure, and Resources Director. We have really two big items on the agenda today and then some updates. I think the bulk of the time will be dedicated to the Community Development Work Plan, and this is a start of a conversation to give you'll hear from Rebecca an update on what's currently under in progress and under work, and then what might be prioritized for this year and next year coming up. And so we're very interested to hear your ideas and feedback around that, and then that can continue next week as well. And then for the Ranch Master Plan, we have Connor and Mark here to do an update, and I think that will be a briefer update, and if you have questions, we can certainly follow up on that as well. So I think we'll just go ahead and turn it over to Rebecca so she can start to walk you through the materials for community development. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. If you're having trouble hearing me, just let me know. I can try to speak up. So my name is Rebecca Everett, Community Development Director, and as Leslie mentioned, are here to present the work plan for community development as it's currently proposed for 2024 and into 2025, because we have several projects underway that will extend over the next 2 years. So we wanted to provide a picture of what the full next couple of years might look like, with a lot of room for guidance and decision-making by the commissioners on what the top priorities should be within our department's work plan. Community development as a department includes several critical county functions, including the building division, the code compliance division, planning division, as well as our community information resources team, which provides a lot of the coordination and administrative support for a lot of our planning processes. So as you can see, our daily operations make up the bulk of the work within the department. There's a lot of just ongoing building inspections, building permitting, development review, special event permitting, short-term rental licensing, coordination, items like that. But we do have staff and capacity for special projects and project work on top of the basic operations of a community development department. And so that's the focus of our work plan, is identifying with that limited capacity that we have for project work, how to best direct those resources into items that will have the greatest impact for our community. We have several projects that are either in progress or already confirmed for 2024. One, which I know you all are familiar with, is the Water Master Plan, which will extend through 2024 and into 2025 with land use code amendments focused on water conservation. We have the legislative rezoning process for the natural resources zone. This is a project that was started last year, piloted on our own county open lands, and phase 2 of that work is set to be wrapped up this spring or summer. We're also embarking on updates to our building codes to align to the 2024 set of international building codes, along with many of our jurisdictions within the county and neighboring jurisdictions as well. So there are a lot of communities all working in tandem on those 2024 building code updates. We also plan to rebuild and re-implement the permitting system that's used for building and planning. It's called InterGov. Resources have been allocated from IT to work on that project this year, and that will be another 2-year project that will likely take a couple of years to fully implement and upgrade our system. That upgrade will also allow us to fully implement electronic plan reviews for all building, permit, and planning project types. So those are major technology and process upgrades that will be underway. We will be implementing the recommendations from the code compliance assessment that you all reviewed extensively last year. So there's that work has already in process. We also are partnering with the Commissioner's Office on implementation of a public process engagement tool, an online tool led out of the Communications Office, and we are participating in that. And then we are providing support on several other county initiatives, including Climate Smart, Future Ready. We're leading 2 teams for that effort out of community development. And we also have a heavy involvement in the strategic plan. I passed over the routine land use code updates. We have a number of items, either errors and omissions or smaller land use code items to get updated this year. And then we will provide ongoing support to the East Mulberry annexation conversation and process. So this is kind of our baseline view of what we've already have planned for 2024. And I'm going to follow this with items that we could use some help prioritizing. But first, I wanted to call out specifically the projects that will extend into 2025 as well. Again, just trying to provide that view that a lot of this work will not wrap up this year, but will extend into next year as well. In particular, building codes and that EnerGov work. So moving on to potential projects, this is I would consider this a pretty rough snapshot of what these projects could look like. There's a rough estimation of level of effort, a rough time frame assigned to these projects, because really time frames and effort are dependent on the resources that are allocated to these different projects, as well as the direction that we receive from you as the county commissioners on how much effort should go to some of these things. So I'll just briefly step through these projects and initiatives. The first 2 on the list there is a focus on intergovernmental agreements. We received a grant, as you'll remember, from the Department of Local Affairs called the Strong Communities Grant through that program that allows us to focus on intergovernmental agreements, getting those either in place or updated with several communities, as well as exploration of a transfer of density units program. We've heard interest from areas of the community about character area plans for some of our rural centers. So that is an option. That's something that we could spend time on this year. And or sub-area plan updates. We have the LaPorte sub-area plan and the Red Feather Lakes area plan, both of which we've heard interest from the community in updating as well. The last item under long-range planning is a check-in on our comprehensive plan 5 years later. The comprehensive plan calls for a 5-year review. We would anticipate that to be a low level of effort, just a check-in this year, not a major update or overhaul at this time, but it's something we did want to make sure there was attention called to. Under policy and code, we have several items that have been discussed with you all last year that extend into this year and would all require time spent kind of evaluating code changes and bringing those forward to the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners for review as well. So tiny homes, establishing a new zone district for manufactured housing preservation, exploring our lighting code, and finally the cluster housing type, which was something that came out of our housing code audit last year and it was not fully implemented. And then the last item on the list is looking at our special event system and code improvements. So that involves both bringing on a new vendor for the permitting system that we use for special events, as well as evaluating our code and our processes and thresholds and things like that relate to special events. So this is a list of items that we could use your input on assigning a level of priority to for 2024, because we won't be able to accomplish all of this with the resources that we currently have this year. So the next few slides are really just kind of scenarios to get you thinking about how some of these items could be mixed and matched into a work plan that is realistic for community development for the coming year and into 2025 as well. So these are not options necessarily for you to select from, but just to help you see how some of the staffing trade-offs kind of come together to fit into a work plan. So for example, if the commissioner's priority was to focus on kind of intergovernmental agreements with other communities, we could put more effort into those in 2024, as well as, if there's an interest in housing, focusing on manufactured housing, tiny homes, maybe some code amendments that relate to housing specifically, and special events, with then pushing some items into 2025, looking at sub-area and character plannings, a transfer of density unit program, and other code updates into 2025. Again, this is just illustrative. Another option could be bringing sub-area plans, character plans into focus for 2024 and pushing intergovernmental agreements into 2025, for example, and shifting some of those projects around. You could mix and match several of these. We have, as you know, we have some long-range planning staff, and we have other planners within our team who also have some skills with code and policy. And so depending on the level of priorities, we can assign staffing and resources to different projects. So we could work on, for example, an intergovernmental agreement with Wellington, and this hybrid option here, an intergovernmental agreement with Wellington, and look at some of our existing intergovernmental agreements, as well as prioritize one sub-area plan update or character area plan with some code improvements. This is just trying to demonstrate the world of possibilities related to the work plan, not to dictate a specific set of priorities to you all, because we would like your feedback on that. Finally, the last thing that I want to just highlight for you or call attention to is sub-area and character area plans specifically. So this is an item that you budgeted for in 2024. And we have received interest or heard of interest from several communities and rural centers across the county who have a desire for more long-range planning for their areas. We have a budget of $55,000 for consultant assistance with some sort of community planning effort for 2024. But that funding will not allow us to accomplish or meet all of the requests that we have heard from Livermore, LaPorte, and Red Feather, and we've also heard of interest in Tahosa Valley and potential other areas as well. So we put on this slide a suggested list of criteria for prioritizing to help make that decision of which areas might be best to focus on for either a new character area plan or an update to existing sub-area plans. So those criteria include things like how much community interest or engagement is there already in an area? Is there a local champion or an agency partner? How much development pressure or pressure from other types of changes might be occurring in an area? And are some of the existing needs or pressures, how urgent are they? As well as any anticipated longer-term future changes. In the second column, are there major vulnerabilities to natural disaster or other socioeconomic vulnerabilities that are being experienced in an area? Is there good alignment in the timing with other planning efforts? If there's another agency planning to do work in an area, does it make sense to also piggyback off of that? And then, of course, always looking at what is the level of effort or the additional resources that might be needed to accomplish a plan in a given area. So I'll just note on the sub-area plans and character area plans, it wasn't included in your packet because I anticipate that we'll continue this portion of the conversation likely into next week's work session once we have time to talk through the work plan. But I did include printed out for you today, and we'll send it on, memos from both the LaPorte Area Planning Advisory Committee and the Livermore community group from Livermore that is advocating for a character area plan. So you'll see you have those memos for you to look at in advance of any future conversations about prioritizing planning efforts for those areas. So wrapping up, I'm looking for questions or feedback that you may have about the 2024-2025 work plan for community development, and hoping to get a better understanding of the top priorities in your mind for our time and resources for 2024. And then as there's time, or we can move this conversation again into next week's work session, do you have guidance related to the prioritization of planning areas for some of the either character area plan or sub-area plan updates as budgeted for this year?
Thank you very much, Rebecca. This would be a good time for my fellow commissioners. If you have questions, comments, observations, we'll begin with Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick clarifying question, Rebecca, and thank you for this document, and this is really helpful to have all this in front of us. The transfer of density units, you mentioned the Strong Community Grants wants to see this, and I'm curious, is there a timeline with that grant to have this accomplished? Because I think that would also help kind of guide some of my thoughts on priorities if there's a deadline or timeline with that grant.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to add that information. The Strong Communities Grant has a deadline of October 2026 to spend the funding associated with that. There are three projects that are components of that grant funding. One is an update to our housing needs assessment, which would be led by our Housing Stability Program Manager, Aaliyah Rodriguez. So housing needs assessment, updates to or new intergovernmental agreements with communities, so strengthening our intergovernmental agreements, and then establishment of a TDU program. So the goal would be to accomplish all of that by third quarter of 2026.
So if I might, Commissioner, thank you. So in that regard, then, for me, that seems to be because of the deadline, and that's an opportunity with the grant, that maybe that has to be a priority because we have to backward plan if we have to get that accomplished by a certain date. All those items, maybe that has to be kind of backward plan for your work, your work plan for your department. Because if that's something we have to accomplish, we need to make sure we support you all to get that. Because that's a really wonderful grant. That's the one from the Department of Local, the 200,000 one we got. And
Yes.
so I think that, to me, would be kind of important. And my second question with that is there any of these priorities that would dovetail, overlap, piggyback into that work? Is there anything that would, on this list, that might be able to be attached to some of that work to help get some of those, would help inform or help some of that other things get done too?
Yeah, so as it relates to the Strong Communities Grant, I think what we see as kind of the best opportunities to utilize that grant funding would be to focus on the Wellington Intergovernmental Agreement, and then exploring a potential transfer of density unit program with Wellington, City of Fort Collins, and Timnath, looking at the area that's kind of in between all of those communities. And we have received letters of support from Wellington and Fort Collins on that concept. So we do have that kind of timeline in mind, thinking of how we work toward 2026. It feels far off, but we do need to be realistic in how long it takes to kind of work through some of those kinds of negotiations.
Okay, that's really helpful. If I might, Mr. Chair, just want to add one other thing is, these are all important for they're all important. So I'm not but I'm going to put in my plug for the lining code. I know it's a high thing, and we've been putting it out for a couple of years, but I even just got an email last week from a resident saying, hey, I heard that you're, talking about this. I would like to, give a shout out. We have some residents who are still having what I call the light wars, and just knowing if we're going to grow, it's better to get ahead of the development to put those standards in place, just so we can kind of, help our wildlife and help with night sky. people, it's important in living close to Chimney Hall the last few months and having my night sky lit up all the time with the round-the-clock work and the explosions. It's certainly become, I've lost most of my night sky recently, so I just feel like, to me, it's maybe something, unless you live out and unincorporated, you don't realize how important it is to preserve that. So it's just I hear that from my neighbors, and I actually have gotten emails from folks who are hoping we're looking into that. Thank you.
If I could just offer one note on the lighting code, it's written in there as a potentially a high level of effort, but that level of effort is very closely tied to what the scope of the project might be. So if that's something that we're prioritized and we got into it, we would be looking at, okay, is this just a land use code update? Are we looking at enforcement as well? Are we looking at phasing out existing lighting? And the more things you add into it, it becomes a high level of effort, but it could easily be a reduced, a medium or a low level of effort depending on the scope of the project.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good questions, good comments, and thank you for your responses. Before we go to Commissioner Stevens, it looks like our Assistant County Manager has joined us at the table and perhaps wishes to share some valuable insights on this discussion.
Mine is a follow-up.
Please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious because we led an effort a couple years ago to update our comprehensive plan with Estes Valley, the town. And as part of that, it seems like there was a part two to enter into an annexation agreement and further develop that IGA and master plan. I didn't see that on the list, so I'm just wondering if there's an update for the board or some information on that.
I was hoping that, Rebecca, would you like to respond to that before we bring it back to the commissioners?
Sure, yes. So I can provide an update from what we can see at the staff level. So Estes just had a pretty major staff turnover in their community development director. Their new community development director just started a couple weeks ago. And so we are waiting for him to get his feet under him to start to engage in any conversations about priorities. But what we have heard communicated to us from the town is that their first priority in implementing the comprehensive plan is focusing on their land development code and bringing their code up to match what's shown in the comprehensive plan, and that they would be interested in looking at more of those intergovernmental relations after they've made it through their code update. But that was what we heard under the previous director, so we'll also check in with the new director to see what priorities he may have.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you. I just want to add to that, Commissioner, we did have a pretty robust conversation with the Estes Valley Plan Advisory Committee. Sometimes I just have to remember the community council, which one it is. But I agree with you. My first initial thought was, where's Estes Park on that? But we had a pretty great conversation, and I know that committee really wants to, they want to start seeing more than just they call it just a handshake. I assured them it's more than just a handshake in that document. But I agree. I think we heard loud and clear from the town of Estes, and also they're looking at a pretty substantial election coming up that might change the direction of their town and of their town board. And so I think there was some things they wanted to kind of, as I understood, settle in. But I know that some people on the EV pack are chomping at the bit to do something. So I just wanted to share that. It's, I think, ongoing conversations. But yes, that was my initial thought when I first read that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Rebecca. Does that adequately respond to your the matter that you have raised?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Commissioner Stevens, thank you for your patience.
You're welcome. Thank you. Well, I'll tell you that while you just the options that were suggested were just samples, I actually like option one. I like having the housing policy focus because one of my priorities is the manufactured housing preservation zone district. Especially since we started some of that work when we were looking at the land use code, both the preservation zone and I guess, and the cluster housing idea. You know, I feel like we started that going, and then it feels good to sort of finish that and tie up those loose ends there. Second, our community is asking us about housing constantly, and so I feel like having a housing focus is not a bad idea. I do think including some of these items that were included with that Strong Communities grant is a good idea. There again, there's not only the IGA with Wellington, but there is some housing work we can do within that grant. And so for me, those would have the highest priority. I'm willing to look at some sort of variation on that theme, but I do think having housing as a priority signals to our community that we understand that they're struggling with housing in our community. So I like that. And like I said, I feel like it does tie up some of the loose ends that we had from working on the land use code. And knowing that Wellington has been, we've been talking about this IGA with them and sitting down and talking to them about that. With regard to the sub-area and character area plans, I don't want to shelve that, forever. And so I do think that having a priority, establishing criteria, I mean, for me, the criteria for those plans would be, I think, some level of interest or having a community champion, because I think it will be easier work if there's some folks that are willing to engage with it and have kind of started the ball rolling and have contemplated some of these issues. Urgency of needs, to me, kind of goes along with the vulnerability questions. Are they vulnerable to natural disaster or other issues? And then always level of effort and staff labor, because I do appreciate the fact that that you sort of outline the work that you do every day, that these projects are not your only work. And so I think that was really helpful on that second slide to say, we're willing to do this work, but here's all the other work that we're doing, and we really need to prioritize. And so I like sort of this, I like the idea of this, 2-year planning cycle too, really, kind of says, okay, well, it also signals to the community we're not shelving those items but that we won't be able to get to them this year. So like I said, option 1 for me looks pretty good, and I'm, obviously would be willing to contemplate, other additions to that, but I do think housing should be our priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. I believe it's my turn now. A couple of questions to begin. One is regarding the intergovernmental agreements that we've discussed. You mentioned, Rebecca, new ones like Wellington and Berthoud, and as been stated, there's been a discussion for the past 10 years with Wellington about figuring out an intergovernmental agreement. So there's new ones, and then there's updating ones. In terms of what the Strong Communities DOLA, Department of Local Affairs grant allows, is there a way to prioritize those? Would we be focusing, for example, on just Wellington, because we've had those conversations for a long time? I don't know where Berthoud fits into the mix. So that's one question. Do we focus on new ones, or where there's the greatest need, perhaps, or perhaps updating, where does that fit into the mix? That's one question.
Yes, yeah, great question. And let me clarify, that's a bit of a typo in the presentation. We do have an IGA in place with Berthoud, but Berthoud is interested in updating theirs, or we've heard that at the staff level. So that I put that in incorrectly in there. I think there's kind of a readiness conversation all around, and then there's kind of a level of effort. So there are little things to do on certain IGAs and bigger overhauls needed for some of the others that are existing. Wellington would obviously be a new IGA that would take a little bit more effort, and bringing all of the stakeholders to the table, making sure everything is agreeable to all parties. Versus, for example, Fort Collins. City of Fort Collins is interested in looking at IGA updates, mostly just to clean up all of the amendments that have happened to their IGAs. So that's a little bit more, potentially more of an administrative type of effort. And so it's pretty variable as you look across all of the different communities that we partner with. We have IGAs in various states, or a lack of IGAs in all the different communities. So in terms of priorities, I would suggest that Wellington, working on a new IGA with Wellington is probably the highest priority, in my mind, because there is a willingness, there's engagement around it. It has been a long, ongoing conversation, as well as there may be the potential to wrap up some little items with some of the other existing intergovernmental agreements. And I wouldn't say there's urgency to those so much as it might not be too difficult to get some other things accomplished.
Thank you, Rebecca. And just to follow up on that with another question that I think is relevant, and then maybe one more question, then I'll offer my 2 cents on direction, perhaps. And that is, generally speaking, when we're talking about IGAs or intergovernmental agreements, it's at least a two-way street. So I'm wondering, I hear and I agree that Wellington should, if we're looking at new IGAs, Wellington should be a high priority. It's a two-way street, so how does that equate to cost sharing and staff sharing?
Because we have the Strong Communities grant, and it was awarded to us with the understanding that there is already some amount of cooperation, while the match amount for the grant is coming solely from Larimer County, I think because that is a grant-funded project, it's not as great a burden potentially on to coordinate with Wellington as it might otherwise be. So I would welcome any thoughts on any cost sharing or approaches there, but we are fortunate to have grant funding to support. Leslie, go ahead.
Please.
Leslie Ellis. So just as a reminder, when we did the IGA with Timnath a couple of years ago, that was mostly done in-house and with staff from Timnath and staff from the county, but it wasn't a tremendous effort that required a lot of consultant expertise or cost, really just mostly staff time and then time of the elected officials, of course, too, to come together at meetings and that sort of thing. I think there were probably at least 2 or 3 joint meetings that were held during that process between agencies.
Yeah, the bulk of the consultant costs for the Strong Communities grant will likely go to the housing needs assessment and the TDU program, Transfer of Density Units program. Perhaps utilizing a facilitator to help with intergovernmental agreements if needed, or some other cost, but like Leslie said, that is more of a staff effort.
Great, thank you. So I would agree with I believe with both of my colleagues that in light of the grant and that resource, those 3 areas that are covered by the grant, IGA with a focus on the Wellington IGA, and then it appears that we might be able to do other updates that are not as comprehensive. So that would be my 2 cents there. I think one of the things that comes to mind regarding the updating of the Fort Collins, Larimer County IGA, there's so much development pressure in the northeast quadrant and a lot of implications. So that would probably be a reason why, if we were to look at any updates, whether it's related to East Mulberry corridor or the northeast quadrant, there might be some logic there. But it sounds like, yes, IGAs, Wellington would be the higher priority perhaps, and then some of these other ones where we're able to do that, provide those updates. Secondly, yes to transfer development units and updating that policy. And I agree that on the housing, focusing on updating our housing needs assessment, as well as looking at some of the discussed changes to our land use code as it relates to everything from establishing manufactured housing areas, zoning districts, et cetera. So agree with that. Then moving right along, I have a question, then I'll try to offer some input on the other aspects, the long-range planning stuff. So with regard to the $55,000 that's been appropriated, it's in the budget for a consultant. My understanding is that that dollar amount is good for one character area plan. And so I'm wondering, related to that, if my understanding is correct, how might we spread that out? Or would that dilute the effort? I guess there are a couple of questions in here. And then also, if we added more money to that budget item, line item, could that expand our capacity to consider perhaps more than one character area plan? There are a couple of questions in there, Rebecca. Good luck.
Yeah, there's obviously a relationship between how much the resources we have and how much we're able to accomplish. And so in terms of the amount that we have budgeted for this year, 55,000, that when we costed that out with a consultant, that would support a character area plan and any kind of significant outreach that we may want to do as part of that. So if we wanted to do a survey for that area or some larger events or things like that, it's probably the consultant support plus the outreach costs associated with it. There may be leftover money from that could be applied to a future planning effort too. It would be a little hard to tell until we got into actually hiring a consultant and scoping that out for a given area. It could alternatively be used to fund an update to a sub-area plan that's already existing, though that may result in the need to bring in other departments or other more specific studies for a certain area, since a character area plan is intended to be kind of a higher level vision kind of document. A sub-area plan gets into more detail about transportation and infrastructure and other issues, and so sub-area plans can get into more depth. If the consultant resources, the funding was increased, we could either do a more in-depth update or plan for a certain area or bring on another area. But from a staffing perspective, we probably can't work on more than one long-range planning effort at a time. We probably can't focus on more than one area at a time, given our own bandwidth to coordinate consultants and coordinate with the community members.
Thank you, Rebecca. Just a couple of other, I'll give some direction and I'll turn it over to my colleagues or back to you folks, or perhaps Lorenda. And that is, so if that last point that you made, even if we were to put more money towards the long-range planning, would we have the staffing capacity to do that? It's not just a matter of money, or how would that work if we put more money towards this effort?
Yeah, hypothetically, it would relate to other priorities and other projects. So if we were to pull a staff member off of some other projects, we could potentially have two project managers for a project at once. But I'd say one planner could not manage two of those long-range planning projects at the same time.
Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. Then I would offer that, the proposed Livermore character area plan would be an area that I'd like us to consider. And I'd like us to have a more in-depth conversation maybe next Monday, referencing the review criteria and see how what we're considering, whether it's Tahosa Valley or perhaps Livermore, how does it meet those review criteria, and can that help us to make an informed decision? Livermore, based on all the recent and going back 5 years conversations, I think that would be a recommendation that I would have, but based on how do we make the case with those review criteria. Another thing I'd like us to consider, I don't know, with regard to the sub-area plans, and I understand it's more comprehensive, I hope we can give that at least some attention in 2024 by way of either some kind of targeted update as we've discussed, or figuring out a way so that those communities, those planning advisory committees can engage and provide their input on the current document. It is my opinion, if we don't do anything in this between now and 2025, I think we're going to lose a lot of interest in what the purpose of those packs are. So I guess I'd put that out there as well, if that makes sense, either facilitating the conversation and focusing on targeted updates of the sub-area plans, as we've discussed, for example, with Red Feather Lakes, and I think as we've discussed with LaPorte. That's my 2 cents. Does that help, Rebecca, provide some direction from?
Yes, I see Commissioner
Yes,
Shattuck.
I also
Okay,
see.
great.
I'm just asking.
Yes, yeah, that provides some direction, and I look forward to some additional conversation on that next week, and we can prepare more information
Okay.
for the requests that we are aware of for the 4 different areas that I mentioned today: Red Feather, LaPorte, Livermore, Tahosa Valley, and we can provide some comparison for you all to take a look at.
Excellent. Thank you for
Yeah.
your patience, Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm glad I asked the Strong Communities Grant because I think that's important because we have an opportunity there. But I also, at some level, would like to, I mean, we've been putting it off for 2 years. I know it's probably very staff capacity, but, you know, I live in unincorporated Larimer County. I hear from a lot of folks about, you know, losing their night sky and light, you know, habitat. And if there's any kind of level of support to advance that somehow, because we've kind of bumped it down for 2 years. And I know a lot of this housing focus seems to be really towards towns and municipalities, and I know that some of the sub-area plans, but this is for a lot of our rural folks who'd like to have some kind of guidance. When we have this growth and development happening, it'd be better to get ahead of this so we don't have to have such a big thing to go back and address those that have been added. And so I would like to have some kind of movement on that, colleagues, because we have pushed it off for 2 years, and it's not something, you know, we have some conflicts in the community, some of those without having some more defined things. I just wondered if there's some kind of level of advancement. I see it's a high level, but if you mentioned there's some levels that we can at least try to address, it would be great to at least progress that somewhat for those people that live in unincorporated parts of the county. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I think we can certainly dig deeper when we get together again next Monday. Did you have something, Commissioner Stevens? Because there's one more thing that I'd like to add to the mix as far as information, based on what I was reminded of this, and that is, it is my opinion that another compelling factor for why we certainly should consider Livermore and perhaps Red Feather Lakes is that recently we had a community conversation up there with over 60 people, and we were focusing on rural health needs. And I know that's one of the considerations for a rural health center. And actually, one of the individuals that was at our meeting committed $1 million towards some type of clinic, if that's what ultimately is decided is the way to address, you know, the healthcare needs up there. That's all I have. Is there anything else, Commissioner colleagues, that you have, or Lorenda, before we turn it back to our friends here?
I guess I'll just say this is really an important thing you do each year, and I really like the idea that you've approached it from a 2-year point of view to show we have many more things here than we have staff capacity to do, and the thoughtfulness from the board around how do we prioritize these and provides good direction for you so that staff is really clear about what their goals are. So I think good questions have been asked. I saw you taking notes about that, and I'm sure you'll bring back more details so that perhaps next week they can decide kind of where you should spend your time in the coming year.
Yes, thank you, Lorenda, and thank you, commissioners. I think this provides us some good guidance, and look forward to continuing the conversation next week, since I know you've got another item to get to, and I think it would be helpful to digest this conversation and be able to discuss again in another week. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rebecca. I think now we can move on to our second agenda item, big agenda item, and that is an update on the ranch master plan. And we have some of our friends and colleagues from that neck of the woods. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thanks for giving us an opportunity to visit with you today. My name is Connor McGrath, and I serve as the director of the ranch. And with me today is Mark Tinklenberg, General Manager of the ranch. We're here today, and you should have a printed packet in front of you to discuss some of the updates to the master plan. As you all are aware, you've been out to the ranch quite a bit recently. You've seen some of the improvements in person as well as in the newsletters. We have completed much of the infrastructure and equine improvements outlined in phase 1 We're seeing great feedback from the community regarding the new infrastructure, and that includes the new 4-H Youth and Community Arena on the northwest side of the campus, the new 200 by 100 outdoor arena. It's next to the building, but it is technically a commercial space that we're starting to utilize in conjunction with the new arena, as well as a standalone area. The MAC equipment warm-up arena is finished. We hosted the Big Thunder Draft Horse Show in January, and it was pretty amazing to watch them use the new facility and have all of that space, especially for those larger 8 hitches that were coming through the facility. And we have completed the ranch maintenance and the DNR land stewardship building. So to recall, that project was an expansion to an existing building that the ranch used as the ranch maintenance area. And then we had an opportunity to welcome the DNR land steward building to join us in there. This slide illustrates the campus as it stands today. Just drawing your attention to building number 4, known as the MAC equipment facility. It's huge. Once you compare it to all the other facilities on the campus, it gives us so much opportunity to bring different events and different equine and livestock events. It's a very large building, which I think we're very happy to have as part of the campus. We have secured a new event that will be coming to the ranch this June, a new equine event that will help buffer some of the time that we used to have before the fair, where the buildings were sitting underutilized. But having that additional warm-up space is very beneficial for that. This is a completed photograph, not a rendering, which is nice to present to you, of the new 4-H Youth and Community Arena. There will be a ribbon cutting on March 26th, 2024, that the ranch, in conjunction with the 4-H, are planning an official opening for that building. And we're also still in the phase of some minor phase 1 improvements. So on the next slide, you'll see FF&E, our furniture, fixtures, and equipment. We're still working on getting all of that material ordered and working with the supply chain challenges that everyone is dealing with. And we really don't want to open the building while it's complete. We don't want to open the building until we're able to hand it off to the community in the way it's going to be used long-term, or get people too comfortable with having no perimeter panels or fencing. And we hope we will be scheduling and have on the books already events starting in April of 2024. In August, we presented to the board regarding the wayfinding and monument signage. Our current monument signage along I-25 is looking a little sad, and we have it currently turned off based on the quality of the display boards. So we're excited to get moving with the monument signage, as well as the general wayfinding family that you can see on your right-hand side of this slide. And finally, we have plans that are spec'd out in more detail on the next slide to build a bathhouse at the RV camping lot, anticipated for Q3 of 2024. So as you can see in your slide, on the picture on the right-hand side, the top, it is facing due north on Andalusian, and then Arena Circle to the west. And then we'll be looking to locate the new bathhouse, which is going to be a great amenity for people using almost 100 RV hookups. Leaving phase 1 behind and focusing on phase 2, as you all know, we have the RFP P3 evaluation and interview period from January through February. We'll elaborate on that in a different slide. We are looking at starting in Q4, running through likely Q2 of 25, the event lawn expansion and phase 2 infrastructure to be determined based on the progression of the RFP will drive what phase 2 infrastructure improvements look like. but they could include the expansion of Shoring Road, additional event parking, as well as access roads to the campus. This is a good illustration of some of the topics mentioned on the former slide. You can see in, I believe that is number 9, but you can see where we currently have the gravel lot where you would all be familiar with the carnival during the fair. We would look to bring grass out beyond there and continue it down to the new parking lots. The Shoring Road would be the road that runs to the east side of the property, going north and south to connect the parking lots. There's a lot more trees and a lot more greenery on this map than exists in real life and that would exist. There's a good portion of the grassland on the campus today is dry grass. We would look at replacing medians and just general areas where we use grass today for runoff. We would look to replace that with cobble, knowing that we're going to be looking to expand plush green grass in the event lawn. And we have to work within the limits of what the state allows us to and what we think is reasonable. But it would give us a lot more opportunity for some of those camping events that are looking for more of that plush green grass, such as Overland. The anticipated schedule for the P3 submissions were due on December 15th. As mentioned, January through February of 2024 will be maybe operator interviews. Looking at October 2024 for a notice to proceed, design, construction through 2026, and then the venue ideally opening in 2027. Next slide. So our next steps, we would continue with the P3 RFP, continue with our design teams on the event lawn, making sure, again, we're good stewards of the land that we end up looking to put in place in the bowl. Looking at lawn toilet facilities, they were spec'd out on an earlier map that you'll see. They're there as a placeholder. The intention is to have something permanent. Where exactly it goes in the event lawn is to be determined. Continue with the construction of the RV bathhouse and the monument signs, looking at other sports centers. And then really there's a big question mark over the First National Bank of Omaha building. We're extremely busy in that facility and we're bringing great diverse events to the community. We're learning and receiving probably weekly feedback that people are looking for more square footage. We're hosting shows that are used to coming to 150,000 square feet, and they're shoehorning it into a 38,000 square feet. I know some of you had an opportunity to see Jurassic Quest last year. We were their smallest show for 2023, and it was pretty tight. So whatever happens with the RFP will likely drive some of the conversations we'll need to have regarding expedition space. And then we'll continue to engage stakeholders in the master plan as a next step.
Thank you very much, Connor. Colleagues, do you have any questions, comments, observations? Yes, Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions, Connor. The first one about the grass, expanding more grass, and knowing that we're having water challenges and kind of, we're asking other people not to plant grass but find xeriscaping. What does that look like, and how much water, and would it be drought tolerant? I'm just curious, what is that different kind of grass that doesn't take a lot of watering? Because it feels like we're asking everyone not to plant grass, but we're expanding it. And I understand why, but I'm just, thinking about water issues. That's my first question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mark can weigh in on this also. Our hope would be that through the removal of some of the grass on the campus where we don't need grass, where we would replace it with cobble, we know we won't get to a net zero, but we're hoping that we would limit that. We also have discussed making sure we work with the likes of turf specialists at CSU so that we're looking at some of that more drought-tolerant grass, as well as some of those grasses that just don't need as much watering. Mark can get into the logistics of where our water comes from and the type of water we're using. But before then, the other part that is important to know is the ranch installed moisture sensors, and we would look to install more moisture sensors in the grass or in the ground. So those sensors can control the zone by the head, by the irrigation head. So once it hits a certain threshold, then it's cutting the water source off. But Mark, could you explain a little bit about the holding, how our water is held and how we use it?
Yeah, of course. And thank you, Connor. Mark Tinklenberg, the Assistant Director of the Ranch Events Complex. So our water it does come from through one of our basins, and it comes down to a holding down by the golf course, and that's nearby the ranch. We have various water sources that comes into that location, and we pull from that as our raw water for all of our irrigated water on the site that is pushed out to these various areas. We are using that the baseline. It is a feature that's designed into our irrigation system that basically it checks the rainwater that comes down, and it's constantly updating and changing that programming of how much water is put onto the site. So it is a pretty sophisticated system that we are implementing everywhere, and we do have an irrigation engineer that is on this design team that is looking at all aspects of how much water is used.
Thank you. I appreciate that answers my question well, and I'm glad to know we're kind of not using potable, but we're just trying to use from that basin. That's great to know. Second question is, you brought up, the need for maybe renovation or increasing the space at the current First National Bank building. I think from day one, when we had first looked at having a hotel and conference space, and that kind of got shifted because of, it got shifted. That was something that I always thought we needed was, more conference space. I had heard that, and I've been in other venues that, people are like, oh, we just need to find a bigger, different space. And I'm wondering, I know we've had to shift some things up and down the list of priorities, but I know that was something that was on the list, and it sounds like there's still that, I think there's been that consistent need or ask for that. Is there enough in the capacity or the funding that we can address that at the same time? Because I think that need is now, and I'm just wondering how and I know you've talked about the doors and be able to get certain things inside, in and out, and the sound and other things. Is that something that we're looking to maybe address sooner than later?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. We have a great opportunity. We have a great challenge at the same time. Until we really solidify what the RFP is going to look like, we don't know what the future of Blue will look like. We don't know. There's so many options that Mark and the team and I have discussed. The buildings are very versatile. We have received structural engineer reporting on the buildings of how they could be used. We've kicked around a lot of ideas of what could we do. What do we do in the MAC long term, the MAC equipment facility? What do we do in Blue long term? We don't know how to answer that question until we understand what happens with the RFP. I'm confident we will have definitive plans this year with the RFP and what our next steps look like. And we're ready to go in whichever direction and move quickly with plans, with teams engaged. And I trust once we get that feedback in the RFP, we'll be able to be better informed of what that expansion could look like.
I appreciate that. And I just have to say, I was very impressed at the draft show, I think that was one of the expansions, was the covering of the warm-up space between the two barns, or you'll have to correct me if I don't have the right names, but certainly made a huge impact for the Rocky Mountain Thunder. I think that's the right name. I hope it is. But I heard nonstop praise and thanks for having that covered and expanded. And as I walked around, so I just wanted to say I thought that was awesome, and it was below freezing, and And it was very cold that weekend, but inside it was so comfortable. And so I just thought that was a huge success. I wanted to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stevens, is there anything?
No, I think we're out of time too, and I have another meeting, so. I
Yes.
just thank you. It's great. Everything looks great, and I'm excited for phase 2.
Same here, ditto. Thank you for your work and looking forward to phase 2 and the review of the RFPs that are out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioners.
All right. As acknowledged, we are out of time, and I think Rebecca has left. And I don't have any other updates other than to say that we'll continue this theme of work plans with the various departments here in the next few weeks to make sure that you're having an opportunity to give input and hear about what's happening across the different departments. So we look forward to that. And with that, that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And at 2:31 p.m., not too bad, we are adjourned.